Hello, huddlers. Today we are tackling a topic that could fundamentally change how you communicate the value of marketing to your CFO and C-suite. Let me just repeat that. That could fundamentally change how you communicate the value of marketing to your CFO and C-suite. And we're joined by Chris Burggraeve, a marketing expert who's going to help us understand why pricing power might be or is the most powerful way to explain brand, or as I'm increasingly using, reputation building to financial leaders. So hello, Chris. How are you and where are you this fine day?
I'm back in New York. Happy to be stateside after 3 weeks in Europe.
So 3 weeks in Europe.
Back.
And we had a conversation, and I think this is relevant. So let's just get that out on the table. So a lot of changes globally in the financial market. Finance equals pricing and challenging. And what was your sense of things in Europe as you were there?
Well, I go there quarterly for board meetings and catching up with a number of people. This case, I also did at request of Google, I did a big presentation, the opening keynote for Google Think 25 in Amsterdam to about 500 CMOs and invitees. I do it again next week in Stockholm for them. And the anxiety is palpable. So what I mean with that is the whole tariff debate is really hitting boardrooms in a big way in Europe. It was a big part of the conversation in the boards that I sat in. And it was also a clear topic of conversation across the CMOs and the various agencies that were represented at this Google event. So we can come back to it after. But there's a sense that tariffs will impact a company's ability to protect their margins, and it will have an impact for the budgets that will be requested, not only for the budgets for 25 and then moving forward 26. So we can come back to it during the podcast, how this impacts.
So, and I think it's important, just the first moment is, a lot of the folks listening work with companies that do business in Europe, have brand that sell in Europe. And it's just, there's a sense that things have changed and you better have some empathy. You better have an understanding. This is not business as usual. And so and I'm just putting a punctuation point in that, and we'll come back and sort of connect the dots.
It is actually, I think a number of people use the word, this is a historic week for Europe in terms of waking up. And for companies, I sit in the boards of, for example, Cartamundi, which is a worldwide player in playing cards, bicycle brand in bicycle, anybody who's playing cards in casinos, we supply them. But we have operations in Mexico, in Canada, in India, in China, in Macau. I mean, we're really in this geopolitical sphere. And so I can imagine as a board, when tariffs hit, it is multidimensional because you win in some, you lose in the other. What the net effect of that is unpredictable. And as we were talking before, Drew, unpredictability for a board leads to discussions, leads to anxiety, leads to, okay, how do we carefully tread moving forward?
Right.
Anxiety and unpredictability is not good for an environment in which marketeers are asking for budgets.
Right. It's not the moment where you're going to invest. It might be the moment where you're going to pull back because of the uncertainty. All right. So
it could be. Again, there's always opportunity and threats. Right. So let's unpack it as we go.
Exactly. All right. So let's get back to the basics. So let's talk about what pricing power what it means and why CMOs need to really think about it and care about it.
Yeah, but first, pricing power is not a new idea, right? This is zero news about this. This is back from the 60s and 70s. It was part and parcel. If you go back to Kotler's 4 Ps, the P of price has always been there for people who do remember the 4 Ps. Marketing is not just that 1 P of promotion and digital marketing, it is 4 Ps. And the P of price has, because of 40 years of lack of inflation in many countries, it has tended to become snowed under and not looked at. But then if you take Kotler as one stereotype, the marketer to represent marketing, there is this other gentleman called Warren Buffett. And Buffett made it very clear after the crisis in 2009 that his number one criteria to invest in any company, and he's arguably one of the best long-term investors, his personal thing is pricing power, a dynamic concept of price. And he defines it as the ability to raise your prices at or above your inflation, your company inflation, not just CPI, so number one, you can raise the price, but without losing volume or value to a competitor. So pricing power has two components, a necessary and a sufficient condition. The necessary condition is you can raise your net price at or above your inflation. The secondary condition that he looks at is without losing volume or value to your competition. That's his dynamic definition of pricing power and his number one criteria to invest or not in any decision.
So one simple way I've been explaining this, and maybe I'm wrong, so let's clarify, but and we'll put it in consumer hands, you're going into the grocery store and you're looking for some aluminum foil and you see the generic store brand and you see Reynolds, and Reynolds is 30, 40, 50% higher. Mm-hmm. Each time I ask someone, which one are you going to buy? And I want everybody who's listening to think about it, like 99% say Reynolds. And at that moment, you sort of say, okay, that's pricing power, right? And so that's in my mind an easy way of illustrating it. Is that a fair illustration?
It is actually the dynamic part. So that's, yes, it's a snapshot, but what Buffett is looking at is the dynamic part of it. It is, can Reynolds increase their price the next year?
Yes.
And keep that going.
Which they have, frankly, for a long time.
Yes, and so the question is, look at another consumer example that everybody can relate to. I ask usually people, do people know how much they pay for Netflix? And most people say, well, it may be 10, 12, 13, I mean, you get a plethora of prices. People actually don't look at it. Now, if I ask you how many streamers are you buying, then people may say 2, 3, 4. The question is, if you have to cut back, which one will you cut back first? And Netflix tends to be the last one you will cut, even if they increase prices year on year. You may not even know how much they increase, so that's good. You're less elastic. And they will be the last man standing. That's the company in the streaming business with the most pricing power at the moment.
Yeah, as I'm thinking about it, it's like see a Peacock, see a Disney. Got to do a little belt tightening. Sorry, but okay. So we understand.
And if you bring that, and if you allow me, Drew, if you bring it back to a B2B context,
yes, please.
I mean, B2B, the difference between B2B and B2C, I've done both. I've done 23 years of B2C, and then last 13, 14, I'm deeply embedded in B2B. There you have fewer buyers, and so there it's by buyer. Can you, year after year, for your solution that you're selling, is your price to this buyer, can you increase it year after year? I mean, typically year after year can be a different rhythm, but can you increase it at or above your company inflation? And is that buyer willing to pay that price? Are you adding brand equity enough to be able to do it despite the context?
Yeah, I think it hit home when I say, okay, so how it's the fourth quarter, you got to hit your numbers. How much discounting are you doing to hit your numbers? Is another way I sort of see it. The leader in a category tends not to have to do as much discounting as the secondary brand does.
Right. And if you take it to retail, for example, typically in the US and in many companies, after summer is when retail discussions are happening. Let's say Procter Gamble talks to Walmart and says, our new prices are this and that. On a spreadsheet, so from a CFO, I always reason from the CFO and board perspective, if you make a spreadsheet and you calculate in there that next year you plan to take X price increase, and then you announce it, you are able to, which is not an easy thing to do. So it requires a sales force, everybody to make an effort to sell a price increase to somebody, to your clients, whether it's B2B or B2C. But say in the example of P&G and Walmart accepts it to raise the prices after summer at some point in time, the consumer. But if for whatever product, you have to start discounting again to make things move. That means that you didn't have the pricing power you thought you had.
Right. Yes.
So
I
to make it
remember that.
abundantly clear for people what pricing power is and isn't.
I remember that really well from my packaged goods days working on Listerine, which was the number one in the category. And they do a price increase every year based on inflation, and then they give it all back with coupons and discounts to do it. So interesting. But I want to get this. Let's sort of make this real for CMOs. You have the statement: marketing equals finance equals business. Unpack that equation for us and help us sort of understand that the connection here, marketing equals finance equals business. Yeah.
So when you're, again, I've been selling, I know the pain of selling a budget, right? I mean, I've been in the shoes of many people at local, regional, global level to sell a budget to somebody, to a CEO, to a CFO, to boards. And then now I'm sitting on the other side of the equation. So what I've realized is when you sell budgets, you need to speak the language of money. Otherwise, marketeers think in their own voodoo language of inputs and outputs. Let's say I want money to invest in, X social media or X TV, and I express it in so many impressions and so many hits and clicks and this and that. Essentially, what I learned is the CFO is utterly uninterested. Because this is an input-output relation, not an outcome that they can take to the bank. My advice to people that I gave also last week at the Google conference is essentially threefold that expresses marketing is finance is business. A, you need to whom are we selling a budget internally? Who is your internal stakeholder? It's ultimately the CFO, the CEO, the board. Do you know that internal stakeholder as well as you should? And the answer is most people don't. So you don't. Second, you don't speak their language. You can't express the budget in the language that they care to understand, which is the language of finance and money. And then pricing power is then a way to get there, which we can come back to. But if you allow me, know your audience is the very first thing. If you need to start from the realization that, you heard me say this number, this is quoted from academic research, Kimberly Wheeler and others, less than 1 out of 10 CEOs really has a marketing mindset to begin with. And even more concerning, less than 1 out of 40 board members of the S&P, which is a good proxy for everybody, has a true marketing mindset. Is a marketeer. They understand the business. Who sits in the board? It's people with a financial profile, risk management profile, operations profile, and marketing is all the way at the bottom when you select for skills. So the people you talk to, they don't know your voodoo. They are not interested in your voodoo. They're only interested in outcome. And if you don't realize that, your budgets will fall flat.
So let
that,
me
I think, is a harsh reality.
I know, and I think our community really understands that. I think the problem has been, I think they really do, and they're using the language of revenue and so forth. The challenge that we have is that a nickel in doesn't equal 50 cents out because marketing isn't a gumball, because pricing power isn't a gumball. You can't flip a switch and have pricing power. You can't flip a switch and have marketing that drives revenue. But it feels like the CFO wants to be able to pull a lever and say, I put $1 million here, I get 10 million of marketing out this year, this quarter, right now. So I think they get the language part, but I think the thing that you're offering is a different way of talking about revenue. Right. And so let's get to that.
Yeah. So the first thing I normally share is the idea, what a strong brand means that on the balance sheet, you have assets and liabilities. You have two types of assets. You have tangible and intangible assets. Finance loves tangible assets, things they can touch and feel and depreciate, and accountants have learned over the years how to handle this. Land, factories, this, that's clear. Marketeers live in the world of intangible assets. Brands, goodwill, technology, code, relationships. Intangible assets come in two forms. If tangible assets, it's what we own. On the intangible assets, you have intellectual capital brands, technology, etc. And you have relationship capital, which is the partnerships, the collaborations, the this and that you do. Let me give an example. Say Booking.com. Booking.com's value is driven not by the plans it's on, because it doesn't. It's really a technology play. It's intellectual capital in its technology, and it's relationship capital with all the partnerships with the hospitality business, with hotels that they've built over the years. I mean, this is a 30-year young brand born in Amsterdam in 1996, but it's driven by intangible capital. And it's so, Jonathan Knowles, marketing finance expert friend of mine, has shown very clearly when he did an analysis over 30 years of S&P that 2/3 of the value, so intangible capital, finance doesn't like it because they don't know how to value it. They don't know how to depreciate it. It's ephemeral. It's complex. But investors love it. 2/3 of the value over the last 30 years of global companies is driven by intangible capital. In the US, it's over 80%, and slightly different by sector, but driven by big tech, even though they get a hit today, 80% is intangible capital.
Okay, so I get that, and I understand that. And there's a famous case going around right now about how Nike drove their intangible assets through the ground. One being that they thought they could sort of cut out retailers, which was the partner and relationship capital. They thought they could sort of forget about their customer. They dropped like $40 billion in value. The problem I'm still having is CFOs, in theory, understand assets, and they've been around long enough to understand tangible and intangible. And investors sort of are these people pulling this thing and saying intangible assets matter. But yet we're still having this conversation of.
And then let's come to pricing.
Right. Okay.
And so then so you go from speaking their language, understanding tangible, intangible. Okay. So what I'm recommending the marketers who is fighting for their budget is to start the conversation from the point of view whether your brand has pricing power or not to develop a great intangible asset or not. So the ladder that I'm recommending is strong intangible asset is driven by strong pricing power, is driven by equity. And as you rightly pointed out, this has a time lag. But the pricing power discussion, you have it or you don't. And what I find in the companies where we've started the debate of budget, not from last year's budget plus and trying to find about input, output, and ROI discussions, but instead shifting it to, okay, dear CFO, let's start from the perspective whether we have or we don't have pricing power. Here's the data. Do we have it or don't we have it? Because you think like Wall Street. Wall Street in the supply shock post-COVID separated the boys from the men, the girls from the women by saying there's two kinds of companies, those with pricing power and those without. I can show you can show the indexes. So Wall Street has already gone to that level of with or without. So what you can say in your company is, dear CFO, I've done my analysis over the last whatever years in my company, and we either have pricing power, this is how we will continue to solidify it and build it, and this is what the budget is for, or in most cases, we don't have it. What do we need to do to reinvest in our company, to build the equity, to build it over time? And that's a hard fight. You will face somebody that may not want to see this discussion, but it's the right fight to have with your CFO.
So if investors get it and Wall Street get it, do you think PE firms get it?
In a different way. They're driven by the same financial incentives like everybody, but on a different time frame. It's 5 or 10 years. So many of them know it, but they only have a 5-year or maximum 10-year window or 10 plus something window. And so they may say, okay, now good enough for us is we have a pig, let's dress up the pig and sell it to the next guy as soon as possible. That may be an attitude. Now, most PE, when you explain them that they can sell a better intangible asset for a higher multiple, thanks to the investment, it may open a different conversation if they're open to it. There's no guarantee though. Again, it goes back to how much of basic marketing understanding does my board and CEO have What's the mandate? And the mandate question on the PE is, if I work for a company with a 100-year window for a family company like Cartamundi, they take the long view. They are interested in building pricing power because they think in generations. PE thinks in 5 years, and in 5 years, building pricing power depends on the industry you're in, but it's a much steeper challenge to do so. Flip it around, and if you say you guys are not investing in it, the chance is very high that you're gonna not sell for a higher multiple, and that you're gonna sell a distressed asset in 5 years from now, or an asset that has not built a lot more intangible value, and the goodwill that you have on your balance sheet will not have increased, it will have decreased, because you mark to market and have to take air out of the balance sheet.
So I think there's two things that I want to really make sure that we cover in. One, you've talked about demonstrating and measuring marketing power. And then I think, well, we need to get into how do you build it and where's marketing fit into that? But let's talk about the measurement part of it, and measuring it in a way that a CFO would sort of be able to get it or not. So what does that look like?
I give you an example of what I've done in Cartamundi 5 years ago. The idea was not known. So I spent time, so let me take you to the steps I did with that particular board. We went through literally training, the concepts of intangible assets, pricing power, 4 Ps. I mean, training sessions with the board about what good marketing looks like, what the best marketing companies do in the world. So they gave me the chance to do that. Number 2, we did analysis whether indeed on our brands and on our both in the B2C side and in the B2B, because this company has both divisions, whether we had pricing power or not. What is the reality? And so we calculated, came back with here is where we have it, here's where we don't. So these are clinical facts. You have it or you don't. And this is the language that the CFO understands. What that then means is if you don't have it and you come up with Excel sheets projecting in the future that you're going to raise prices as part of your growth strategy, then I could easily say, and the boards see that it has no merit to put in price increases on the basis of lack of pricing power. You need to rebuild. How do you then rebuild? Again, it depends then by company, by business, how you do that.
But let me stop you for a second, because do we have it? And so is an exercise of, we took a price.
Data crunching.
What data are we looking at specifically? Because again, if a CFO doesn't understand this, you have to bring the math to them and work with them on it.
We'll work with them. Ideally, you work with them, which in the case I worked with them, and we went through contracts, we went through history. So we spent time and energy with a few people from finance and marketing work together, literally sitting together and say, okay, on an Excel sheet, over the last 3 years, Warren Buffett's definition, were we able to raise the price over the last 3 years to these B2B clients, yes or no? In net wholesale, were we able on a net basis to increase? Number 1 condition. Number 2 condition, did volume at least hold? So not decline, at least hold for this client. We did that client by client, and then you aggregate, you do an 80-20 by country or by geography. So we did the analysis, and you come out with an Excel sheet with red, orange, green, and saying, for these clients we have it, for these clients we don't. Why not? And then understand what we can do, and then you start to have discussions. For those where you have it, how can you nurture and protect it? For those where you don't, what do you need to do to get it back?
And I'm imagining in this calculation of red, orange, green, and is this notion of sort of how dependent are they on your product or service to do their business, how entrenched, how many employees are actually touching it. There's a lot of probably variables that go into the strength of how deep are you, right? And there are a lot of, think about it, low value products and services that if somebody came along and said, I'll give you exactly what they have for 80% less, you go, yeah, it feels like a commodity trade. I can do that. So, but they're
essentially it forces people to question. For those where you go to orange or red, you go back to this core concept of value proposition. Is our value proposition right for this particular customer? Are we able to do more for more, in comparison to the reference, to our competition? Are we able to do that? Or what's the issue? Is our issue product and offering? Is our issue service? Is our issue, where is the pain point to be able to deliver more for more and for them to see that they're willing to pay for it? Because in the end, pricing power is in the mind of your buyer. It's not in your mind, it's in their mind. We go back to the core principle of willingness to pay.
The mind of the buyer. Okay, now we're talking into marketing language because we're talking about mind share and how they think about it and perception. And these are again, this is sort of in the voodoo territory.
But now you have your CFO with you, because for them the outcome, which is can I, yes or no, plan for next year to increase the price,
right,
now translates into, okay, is our buyer willing to pay that price? And if they're not, or if we see that historically they weren't, why not? And you attack that problem from an outcome perspective as opposed to isolate it and say, there's a difference in coming with a budget to your CFO and say, I need more of this, less of that. Here's my shift. Here's my attribution allocation. Here's my lead gen strategies. My learning has been, if you started from the data of having or not having pricing power, the click in their mind happens. That's the difference. It's the starting.
Then this may answer the PE question. So in the best case scenario, when you've worked with a company and you've said, you don't have pricing power, you need to get pricing power. In order to get pricing power, you're going to take these steps, and we should talk about them. What is the shortest sort of time frame you've seen a brand gain pricing power?
It tends to not be overnight. So that's an illusion that CFOs, indeed, they believe the $1 in, $1.50 out, and this happens overnight. This is where you have to train them with examples in your industry and outside of the industry to see what works. In a B2B environment like Artemundi, for example, where you deal with this is the the monopolies, the Pokemons, the this and that. I mean, it takes it. You're building trust with your clients. That is not done in 1 week or 1 month. It is something that is 6 to 1 year, 6 months to a year is a typical minimum to see the next level where they're going to come back with another quote. If you make a year or multi-year contract, it's that next time, are you able to increase the price? There's very few examples where overnight you may have a hit product, but they typically come in and go out, where you may have pricing power. If you are a Supreme, Supreme, the youth brand, if they come out with a new something, you may have lines for that newest Supreme skateboard, and they may sell it for a very short term on the internet and sell it on, and then it disappears again. A Taylor Swift ticket may have a very short-lived super premium and then get out. But those are exceptions to the rule, where the rule is going to be more 6 months to a year to multiple years to see pricing power happen, which is exactly going back to Warren Buffett's thing. It is why he makes it such an important criterion, because it's the companies that do it right that he wants to invest in. The companies with the mindset of over multiple years, year after year, do this. He had the second quote, Drew, which is very relevant for the times we're in. It's only when the tide goes out that you can see who is swimming naked. And people have seen that quote appear everywhere. What he meant with it is, if you don't invest in brand health during the good times, you will be in trouble when the bad times are hitting. And the bad times, as we started the conversation with tariffs, I mean, the supply shocks, inflation, now tariffs hitting inflation again. Inflation will keep hitting most people's offerings, whether products, solutions, or services. So you start the year, every CFO starts the year with a bottom line impact of X% in their input costs. Right there, inflation eats from the bottom on your margin. And the first thing they will do in their Excel sheets and with the CEO is, okay, we need a minimum of X% inflation of price just to stay where we are in margin. just to stay where we are. Now we haven't built anything additional. The question to the marketeer becomes, can we get away with that? And this is the third or fourth year already of this type of pressure. So only the people with pricing power can do it again. The ones without will have to go back to the drawing board and say, I need reinvestment in my thing. That's the reality.
So in terms of sort of building to this goal of do we have pricing power and talking about what's interesting to me is brands that have pricing power are doing a lot of different things right. It's not just marketing. It's their customer service is as good or better. They're, all the way through the AEs. There's sort of a customer centricity that permeates the organization. Their partners believe in them more than they do some of the others that they built up over time. And there's a clear understanding of what the brand stands for and delivers among the sort of the buyers in there. So what I like about pricing power is that it forces the marketer to say, I don't live in isolation. I can't build pricing power alone. I need to have sales and do it because how we go to market and how we talk about the product is will do it. But I'm curious how you see, because it's now our go-to-market, and basically it's everything impacts pricing power, right?
It does.
And so as a marketer with a bunch of folks listening, let's try to outline a process. So they've explained this to the CFO, and the CFO says, okay, I get it. I don't know if I have the 3 years that it's going to take for us to get this. I see how you're going to measure it. What what are the steps here? We've analyzed that we don't have as much pricing power as we want. We're not the leader in the category. The category leader does have pricing power. We don't. So we need to get there. Now what?
In the case of so I think there's two questions I will come back to. One is in the case of you don't have pricing power, my learning is in the go-to-market, which starts, a go-to-market strategy is really going from insights and value prop all the way to your marketing and sales funnel and the steps in between. And pricing is the end of that step. Pricing is how much I can charge. So if you go to market is a multi-modular component that starts with value prop and ends with pricing, and marketing and sales funnels are towards the end of that pricing block. If you feel that you can't ask the price you want, my lesson is you need to go back to the drawing board on the value proposition. That's usually where something is wrong and needs to be re-architected. That's the product solution as a whole. Look at it and say, are we offering the right thing? Is the reference that our client buyer is, whether it's B2B or B2C, has the reference shifted so that they don't look at it with the same level of eyes as we thought they did? Because what is a value prop? It's a combination of relative benefits versus relative price, but versus a reference. And very often it's references that have shifted in the mind of buyers. And once you understand, based on insights, how the reference has shifted, you can re-architect the relative benefit communication versus relative price that is being communicated. That's the real hard, typical marketing work that we're good at. We know how to re-architect these things, but we need to know its outcome. We need to know why we are making the change. So if we have pricing power, we have a value prop that resonates. How can you make it stronger? If you don't have pricing power, look in your value prop, relative benefits, relative price, and reference. What is not working in that equation? And work with R&D or with your product people or with this and that. Again, marketing is 4 Ps, not 1. It's not social media. Marketing has the P of product as the number 1 to start with, followed by the P of place, which is the number 2, followed by the P of promotion, number 3, and P of price is number 4, in that order. But there is a short-term answer for your CFO as well that I wanted to come back to, which is what we're good at as marketers is willingness to pay, is what we are focused on. We build willingness to pay in the mind based on a value prop. We then price in a P&L. We price segment-wise as close as possible to that willingness to pay. That's the top line. That's the hardest, longer-term part to build. But strong brands with strong pricing power have an appeal to the CFO on the bottom line with much shorter impact. Let me explain. It's a concept called willingness to sell. Not my invention. It's an invention of Felix Oberholzer-Guy. He's a Harvard professor that coined this term, willingness to sell. This is the bottom line part. A strong brand has multiple immediate impacts on the P&L that are beneficial to the CFO, starting with a lower cost of hiring. Strong brands, if you invest in your brands, your cost of hiring goes down. You don't have to buy people's soul to come and work for you. The stronger your brand, the more loyal people will stay with you. So the cost of hiring goes down, the loyalty will be higher, and people will stay for less money with you. So that's an HR benefit. Secondly, if you have pricing power and you talk to the banks like brands with strong pricing power because immediately the cost of your interest will go down. You're a more bankable bet because you have pricing power. Your payback capability is higher. You have lower interest rates to pay back on a loan. If you have equity, you typically will have a higher share because the stronger the brand, the higher the equity price will be. So that's on the capital market effect. Third, in terms of buyers and suppliers, you typically have better credit terms. If you're buying things from people, the stronger the brand, the better terms you can negotiate. Right there. And again, I've lived through this with when we had pricing power, we forced upon our suppliers inflation terms, this terms, that terms, to protect ourselves for tougher times. So what you can see is on the bottom line, with immediate impact, a brand with strong pricing power has also much more leverage to protect themselves on the bottom line part, with much more immediacy than the growth you need on the top line part. Does that make sense?
It does. It's funny. I'm thinking about, and I'm wondering about share of market in certain cases. And of course, this is retail, but I'm thinking about Walmart and, 25 to 40% of category sales for B2B. If they change the terms of the deal, you kind of suck it up because you want that's 25 to 40. So I guess you could call that product. I mean, it's just sheer mass share of.
They have pricing power. And again, a Walmart, if you are a retailer and a retailer where you have pricing power because your listing fees may be higher, you have much more margin power in the negotiation with the suppliers, etc. If you have a retail concept that people want to come and shop at, you have pricing power towards your suppliers.
So I feel like we should be able to create a GPT of your brain, Chris, and we could create a pricing power GPT that would enable our community to input some data, of course, in a very protected way, in order to sort of get at this and start to create some formulas to get there. Because there's math here somewhere.
It's math. It's with pure, simple Excel sheets.
Right. So, all right. Well, note to self, we'll get working on that after the show. But
maybe then AI agent that can do it for you if you can have the data to be inputted.
Yeah, exactly. Let's create an agent that will sort of get at, do we, answer one question, do we have pricing power? That's part one. If we do, how do we maintain it? Because it's always a risk. It's, the markets are dynamic. You could have pricing power today. It's like Google had pricing power because they had 90% of the market, but now they're disrupted by ChatGPT and all the other LLMs, and maybe their pricing power is going to go down a little bit.
Or they go back. So what you see Google do, for example, to make that example, what are they doing? They're adding Gemini in the Google product for free. You don't pay for Gemini. So they're adding, their value proposition is now more for same or more for less. They moved, so the reference is shifting because this is a perfect example of reference shifting. We used to compare only in search in the Google discussions of AdWords. Now it's search plus whatever an AI solution can give you. So Google is re-architecting its product experience towards us and determining how can I protect my pricing power given this shifting and unpredictable AI component. Will I ask people to pay more for Google will it be for free? Now, right now it's free for us. We are the product. Will that change? They don't change that. but they are changing the AdWords equation, providing more value, a different value to their clients in a dynamic AI context.
So in the we used to talk about, as marketers, we would talk about things like brand health, and we'd find a different number of ways to do it, and some would measure it on an annual basis, some had other more dynamic tools that they could measure it. Is there a way for marketers to create a pricing power, well, just dynamic index that would show as a marketplace that would help? Because in theory, marketing, once we got all the 4Ps right and we're pumping equity into the marketplace, we're gaining market share, we're seeing that. There should be a way of tracking that so that while that's a lagging effect, the CFO can see, oh, we move the needle. Because again, if we have to wait 3 years for this, there's no hope for the CMOs listening to this here.
No, and I understand. And so there's various proxies to, again, if you accept the laddering. So if you think like a CFO, you have the intangible asset,
right?
That it's predicated upon having or not pricing power. Pricing power is predicated on having brand equity grow. So how do we measure progress in brand equity, and how fast can you get it? And brand equity, to be specific to the audience, is brand equity. Brand health comes in two kinds of parameters typically, which is the perceptual, attitudinal component of your brand. How much do people know me, all the way to how much are they an ambassador of my brand? That's one pyramid. And the other pyramid that you can track in the mind is behavior. And ultimately, it's only behavior you can take to the bank. Paid behavior. Behavior means you've tried my product, you repurchase, you repeat purchase, and you pay for it. So not just a sampling, a paid behavior is what the CFO wants to see. So the question and brand health today is top line tomorrow. Brand health today is really pricing power tomorrow. If you don't have in your metrics of brand health any indication that you've built WTP at all, the chance that you can, on an Excel sheet, said we're going to raise the price to cover inflation 6% is almost non-existent. You're going to fool yourself.
To pay, just in case WTP is willingness to pay, just in case anybody
was WTP willingness to pay.
Right.
So we go, brand health is, or you can make the connection, brand health, WTP, pricing power, intangible assets. That's the ladder that of outcome that finance would, you need to train your finance to look at, and you train your own market organization to think about. Now, NPS scores, for example, is a imperfect, depending but could be a short-term proxy to give you an indication. We know how to game NPS in the meantime. People have learned how to game this metric. So if you fool yourself and you say our NPS scores in 6 months have doubled, tripled, and that's a proxy for brand health, and therefore, yes, no problem to raise the price 10%. As long as you're truthful to your metrics in brand health, if you're going to game it because your incentive structure is linked like it, you're not going to do your company a service.
So here's one thing that I think almost every CMO in B2B that I talk to has a challenge with close rates, and they're going down. I mean, it's like 20% feels good right now, which is 1 out of 5, which feels bad to me. But I feel like close rate is another possible proxy for pricing power, or at least for brand health, because the stronger the brand, the more likely you are to close and win. Assuming
depends. If you give an offer they can't refuse at half the price and you've closed, it's a bit like ROAS discussions. So if you're in a panic and you say go close at whatever price, sales may close, but they may close at a level that is really detrimental to your P&L.
Right.
So I would say close at a certain price level. That's the second condition. It's close at a certain level.
Right.
That's the elasticity test that you're doing, because de facto closing is a test of elasticity of pricing, economically speaking.
Right. And so it is why in the fourth quarter, or whatever, the fourth quarter of someone's fiscal year, there's discounting going on like crazy because they're trying to get to the numbers. And that
And I
is
understand, again, I've been there, had
right.
the pressure, lived through, and then people say we can live through another day. But this is where the whole discussion all the time of long-term, short-term, and living for the next quarter, whether you're PE on a publicly quoted company, in a family company, slightly different, but depends even. The pressure is everywhere to say, okay, just for this quarter, how many times have we heard it just for this quarter? But you do this a few times, and you need to cycle it, because if you do it for this quarter, guess what? In 12 months, that quarter needs to be cycled. How do you cycle it? So I think there's a difference. That's why I go back to the board marketing mindset all the time. If you're sitting with people who only think very, very short term, as a marketer, you have three choices, right? You can complain about them. You can love it, leave it, or change it, right? You can either say, okay, I don't care. I draw a salary here. I have a mortgage to pay, and I understand this. I'm not judging. I need to live. I'm gonna do what I'm told, and that's fine. The second option is I can go. So I complain. I love it. Complain, do nothing. I love it. I do nothing, or I can leave. I can go to another company. It's the choice you have. I'm suggesting before you do that, fight the honest fight. And I know how tough that fight is. I fought it many times and frustrated many times too. You try to convince somebody to say, okay, guys, see this effect. If you're ultimately hitting a board that says, you know what, our mandate is 2 years and that's it. Pricing power, don't talk to me about it. It's about short-term optimization, essentially dressing up the pig, put a nice ribbon about it, sell about it, and it's for somebody else after us. If that's the reality you live in, then you can optimize within that reality if you want. What I'm saying here, pricing power is a notion for people who are serious about building an intangible asset. If you're not serious about it, it's a concept that you need to park aside. That's the harsh reality of business. If you work for a PE with 2 years window only, and they don't want to talk about it, you have a choice as a marketeer to either stay there, work with it, draw a salary, and do your short-term optimization and 595 discussions. You can do that. You give them what they want, which is short-term leads, and then in 2 years from now, you know you need another job.
So let me ask you one last question before we sort of wrap up. I have heard, and this is a relatively recent discussion, where a CMO who'd worked for multiple PE firms had been successful building a demand, or we'll call it a growth engine, such that the PE firm put it as an asset of the sale.
Okay.
And I thought, okay, that's really interesting. When marketing becomes an asset of the sale, now the finance people get it. Do you see that, and that basically means that they have a really, really solid target audience, lead management program, nurture stream program, ability to convert at a decent level and at a predictable level.
It's in the eyes of the value is in the eyes of the buyer. Remember the old Oscar Wilde quote? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If you can sell me this growth engine as part of your assets, this is intellectual capital on your
Right.
balance sheet that you're trying to sell me and say, look, Chris, this has an incredible value. Aren't you willing to pay, revalue it as X, and you need to pay a multiple on it as a buyer. If I believe in that growth engine and its value, hey, yeah. Or I don't and I discard it. I give you an example. There's many within PE as well. If PE sells often to PE, the number one question that when I sat in many due diligences on the buyer side, so I've been on the sales side, but I've also on the buying side. The number one thing I ask is show me proof of pricing power. Is the number one question. And guess what? Those people who can show it, you go back and say, okay, this multiple may be deserved. Those people who can't show it, the multiple is going down. Because what is the number one thing you want to avoid as a buyer is buyer's remorse. You buy something that is empty, and then you bought it for too much of a price, too much goodwill on your balance sheet. And on top of that, you have to inject money to build what they haven't built.
Yeah. So I hope at the end of this that the folks listening have a sense of how the math works on pricing power, how, at least to determine whether or not they have pricing power, and it may be by product or category or industry. And if they don't know, we'll figure out how to help you get there, and that'll be an interesting outcome. But that feels like a good exercise for, and a good takeaway for any listener here, is to do that, because the exercise of doing it will help you understand how the business makes money. You'll understand a lot more, and it's probably a question that you haven't asked. All right, Chris, we're running out of time, but one piece of advice that you would give to B2B CMOs who are about to get at this, doing this pricing power journey, and they're going to set up a call with their CFO next week and say, okay, let's talk about pricing power. What's one piece of advice for them?
Well, I would say prepare for that call. So, have that coffee, have that discussion, prepare for it. What I find is that many marketers lack some of the corporate finance speak. So I would say read up whatever you want around your category, your area of business. And when you reach out for that coffee and say, let's talk about it, do we have it or not, with an idea, be as prepared as you can be and say, I'm willing to walk that path with you. And here is why I want to walk that path with you. Let's get out of the discussion of Mars versus Venus and finance versus marketing.
Right.
We are working for the same company here. We have one same goal, that is building that strongest balance sheet possible, that strong intangible asset. I want you to explain me very often, to show your vulnerability and say, can I have a session to understand how strong our brand is from your perspective, from a balance sheet perspective, and understand this. A number of CFOs, Marketeer, that I've advised to do this, they came back and say, this was refreshing. And most CFOs have been very open to it and say, okay, this is where we stand. And one thing leads to another.
I love it. Well, we covered a lot of ground. Thinking about, put brand aside, put reputation aside for a moment, putting your thing on pricing power, I do think elevates you in the eyes of the board and thing. And so you can't go wrong getting an understanding of this. This will help you get closer to your CFO, and it will help you think about building long-term value. Now, if you work at a company that is looking to build long-term value, you'll find that out too, and then that'll be your new reality. Okay, well, thank you, Chris. How can people engage with you?
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. You can find me there and I'll respond. I have a website called www.vicomte.com. Vicomte is my last name in French, means Viscount in English, Vicomte.com. There is there's the books I wrote about it. There is free stuff that you can download. Actually, there is a third book that is fully a small book that is the ultimate guide for CMO guide for scarce board seats, which you can download for free. And it shows you the intricate workings of a board and CMO's experience on those boards to help drive cognitive diversity on board. So my pet peeve, if you will, I'm wishing to have more CMOs that make it to the room where it happens, so we can influence this whole pricing power debate straight from that room.
I love it. Well, together we are championing the world, the role. Less than 17% of public boards have a marketer on that role. So, all right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, huddlers, for staying with us.